Cody Britton. Today is 9/26/2018. Let's get this going. All right. So quick housekeeping. We'll go over this probably more when we get more people. So I guess today it doesn't really apply. Oh no, go back. All right. Quick lineup for today. Brief introduction to me, 10 to 15 minutes of plagiarism in social sciences. I always think this is an important topic to cover, partially because I think a lot of times it's misunderstood, and it's one of those things that unless you are using something where you're reading primary sources or news all the time, right, you might not have a ton of access to it is to plagiarize to. I am guilty of this often, especially when I don't mean to be. So we'll try and give you guys some tips to avoid it. Excuse me. And then if people join up, we'll have a short Q&A session over that, and then we'll go from there. The assignment that I'm covering today is 3.4.1, and the activity is called "How is the government funded?" And then, like I said, if we get more people going in there, we'll get some questions and we'll get out of here. If not, this might be a pretty quick session for you guys to get through. All right, so what is plagiarism? I think that is something that is always really important to note. A lot of times people have different ideas for what is plagiarism. As a high school teacher, I teach primarily freshmen, so quite often I am constantly trying to explain to people half my age what plagiarism is. And if any of you are parents and or have younger siblings, you understand exactly what it is that I'm going through. You'd also be surprised to know that it happens everywhere. It happens all the time, and a lot of times I would argue that it's not even on purpose, but it is something that is important to know and be aware of, and it also is something to make sure that you're not doing on accident. You don't want to be that person. So I'm always surprised to hear that it happens as much as it does in schools. Being in an online setting, a lot of times I even have students here through grad might take some things from different sources, and that gets a little bit tricky too, because you don't really want to call students out for that kind of thing, because I mean I've been there where you start finding the easy way out, but you gotta kind of honor the rule there. So the official definition, right, if you're looking through Webster or something, is the taking of someone else's work and passing it off as your own. The way I see it, plagiarism and cheating go hand in hand with me, and it is one of those things that I think is one of those, it's ethically unfair. And sometimes, especially in academics, we have policies in my school building that I teach on a daily basis that have very strict plagiarism policies. When you get to college, it's the very same thing. Sometimes it's even more awkward. Usually you'll end up meeting with the president of the school and things like that. It gets pretty serious, the higher up that you go. If you are in a job that requires any kind of writing or reading or using of work or anything like that, the risk of a position that, if you're being dishonest, right, this is fireable in some cases, right? So, if this doesn't apply to you in your professional life, it absolutely applies to you in your academic life. And a lot of even the assignments that you do through Graduation Alliance, a lot of times they require you to use outside sources and things, and making sure you're just referencing them correctly is super important as well. So this is not how every example goes. We're all on the same page. For example, Joey is supposed to write a paper on the effect of labor unions in middle-class jobs. He finds that he is struggling with finding more details about the history of unions. So what does he do? He goes to the internet, right? The all-knowing Google. He Googles labor union history, finds a website that has some really good facts, copies and pastes it into his own document, and submits the assignment. Why is this an issue? Your first indication of issue here should be, the fact that he simply Googled something and found a website that found information that he liked. That is a little bit questionable. But even so, the fact that he copies and pastes it into his own document and submits it, right, what is missing here? I never said or wrote if he actually was sourcing the person or giving the person credit who might have written it for him. This is dangerous, right? This is plagiarism. This guy is stealing someone else's work and making it his own. Plagiarism is cheating, so this is why it matters, right? Joey did not do the work. Someone else spent the time, resources, blood, sweat, maybe tears, writing this thing, right? And now Joey is going to get credit for it. Hopefully he doesn't if a teacher is kind of keeping up on that kind of thing, but he shouldn't get credit, right? And so because he felt he was stuck, you know, he might resort to something like that. And that's just not fair. I think we can all agree that, you know, being in those situations where you don't know where else to go with those kind of things, it's very common to sit there and be like, hey, you know, this is the easiest thing for me to do is to go find it somewhere else. So let's look at some ways we can get we can avoid it happening to you. Oh, I put that in there wrong. Shoot, put that in backwards. Sorry, guys. There we go. So I want to give you some more examples too of some ways that this kind of thing can happen and how it does happen. If you change a word and sentence order of a passage or a text or something that you read, that's plagiarism. If you cite sources that you might not have used or that you didn't use, right? That's dangerous. Copying a packet or a passage verbatim, right, or word for word, and then you don't tell anybody where it came from or give any credit to anyone else, that's a legitimate thing that's considered plagiarism. In college, there is a very well, it's a hidden market of people who will literally write essays for you. And while it might be helpful so you can go hang out with your friends, it's very, very much plagiarism. And I've known students who have gotten kicked out of college because they've hired someone else to write their works for them. If you download a paper offline and it's not yours, it's dangerous, right? If you use too many quotations, right? Sometimes I have students who I'll say, hey, this is the source that you have to use to write this essay. And they'll give me basically half of the essay deconstructed. And, you know, while it might have a few of their ands and buts and ifs in there, but it's not their work. And I have to explain that to them that it's actually still considered plagiarism. And a lot of times those students are surprised, and a lot of times those students don't really understand what's going on, but you know, it is still plagiarism. Cliff notes. Ooh, when I was in high school, Cliff notes were the thing that you used whenever you didn't know what was going on. And unfortunately, if you use Cliff notes in a work that you have to turn in or submit, it's considered plagiarism because it's summarizing something for you, right? And that doesn't work. Sorry if you can hear my cats in the background, right? They're in my office and they're running around. All right, so some ways to avoid plagiarism. Always try and put it in your own words first. That is the key to making sure that you are probably doing something correctly here, right? Everything that you produce, especially for work that's written, has to come from you. And it has to be really clear that it comes from you. So making sure that you're still covering everything and you're talking about everything that you might need to talk about, but it has to be in your own words, right? The second you start using someone else's tone, vocabulary, or, you know, message, you got to make sure that you're either crediting that person or changing it to make your own. Always make sure that the message you're sending is coming from yourself, right? Make it your own voice. Never copy and paste. I'll let you in on a little secret here. One of the first things that I do in a lot of the written works that I get here through Graduation Alliance is I simply just take it and I actually copy and paste it into Google, and I can usually get a good cross-reference to see if there's other like sources that have been used. Unfortunately, it happens more often than I would like to hear students using things like that, and it gets a little bit questionable because, you know, a lot of the assignments that these classes that I teach offer aren't really anything impossible. It's just more, I think, that a lot of times students don't manage their time very well, or they run out of time, or they're feeling stuck, and they just kind of reach out for those sources that what might help you get something done in a pinch, it's not necessarily the correct way to do it. So that's kind of usually what I do. Another way too is I always read through a source first, react to it and say how I feel about it, right? I might write a little bit down about what it made me feel, some things that it made me think of. And usually then I can make some kind of message that will sound like it is coming from me, right? Instead of writing in the words of the author, right? I have to write in the words of myself, the author. And that gets a little bit different. This is always a fun little cartoon here. And this guy's giving this teacher the paper, and it has an F on it. And he says, "What do you mean all my facts are wrong? I copied everything straight off the internet." Man. So plagiarism and paraphrasing, they toe the line together. They're not too far off from each other, and it's very easy to slip into one or the other, right? Rearranging of sentences or words to say the same thing is not an acceptable way to avoid plagiarism. When this kind of thing comes up, right, if you read something that you like and you want to use it in there, but you start putting it into your own words, if you paraphrase it and it sounds still too close without a citation, that's plagiarism. So the safest way to think about this is, if it's not your idea, I would strongly consider citing it. Where I'm from in Michigan, there's a college up here called Calvin College in Grand Rapids, and it's a pretty well-known school in the area, and they're very well known for their academics. And what they do is they actually provide a website where you can actually type in sites that you find via, if it's something you find on the internet, if it's something that you find maybe in print, if it's something you find in a magazine somewhere, if you're reading National Geographic, Time, People, whatever, all you have to do is basically follow the steps, and it's a fill in the blank service, and you can go in and actually plug in some of the sites, and it'll produce a citation for you that you can put in text, so that you're giving credit to the person that wrote an assignment or wrote a piece that you might be writing. And it also makes sure that you're being honest about it, right? And so if you are ever using this kind of website, though, it's always good to make sure that you copy it down right, too, because what it does is it guarantees you're giving the right credit to somebody that might have written something you're using. So night site, put a star next to it, circle it, underline it, whatever helps you remember it. It's a good one. So I use it quite a bit. Take a break here for Q&A, but I would just be asking myself. So here's me laughing at Bart. Haha. Oops, sorry, I skipped. Okay, we'll move on to the assignment piece here so that you guys can, excuse me. I'm just getting over a cold. Seasonal allergies are whipping me up right now. But what I would like to do is, okay. It is always important to understand why you're doing an assignment. And I don't like when students, especially in my classroom, I don't like when they feel like they're getting an assignment that just doesn't matter or doesn't help them. And I think that's a valid point, right? If you're working on anything that actually takes up time, you should be making sure that it's worth your time, and it should be helping you towards the class or whatever it is that you're doing or studying, right? And so I wanted to cover this assignment because I think it's one that people kind of blow off because it really isn't that hard, but I think people kind of miss the scope of what the purpose of it is. And so how the government is funded is a assignment that challenges the student to kind of look through the government and see where money goes, where it flows, and it also kind of helps students understand where money is coming from, where it's going to, and what really what role the government plays with a lot of the money that you hear about all the time, right? We hear national debt all the time. Actually, I can show you guys a really cool website real fast. I hope everyone can see this. National debt calculator. Move this over here. Yeah, here we go. So this shows you literally all of the money that's moving around in the United States right now. On the right side, you'll see different workforce statistics and things, but it shows you literally credit card debt, student loan debt, that's me, mortgage debt, that's also me. It shows you all of these things, though, right, that people are paying in, paying out. It's not good. This is our national debt. And it's really interesting to kind of go through this and see, you know, what this means. What's important to note too is this is all literally related to the government, right? The U.S. federal tax revenue is actually what this assignment asks us to do. And a lot of this extra stuff is kind of in here too, but it always kind of shows where the And I think it's a really great resource if you're ever looking to, I guess, learn some new things or kind of see where money is. You can also look at it from an aspect of states. So you can see which states are in debt, which states are not in debt, and things like that. And it's just it's a really good way to make sure that you're I guess, what am I trying to say here? It's a good way to make sure that you're informed kind of what's going on. So like I said, why this assignment really matters, it's important to recognize where money comes from, and not just like, does money grow on trees kind of thing. No, like, but there is a group that literally prints money. There is a part of the government that prints things or that prints and makes sure the supply of money in the United States is up, right? And understanding kind of where all that goes, what role that plays, the effects of it, and things like that. It's important to understand where money goes in the U.S. It's also important to understand what kind of entities or government agencies that exist that kind of manage the money in the United States and regulate it and make sure that it's not being misused or misappropriated, right? It also just kind of gives you an overall scope of how the U.S. operates. I love this assignment. I think that it challenges students to really make sure that they're getting through their, really make sure that students are getting through to their government, understanding kind of, what's going on behind the scenes. Because, as a citizen, we can all agree that things move pretty quick. And if you're not paying attention, you might miss some stuff, right? We hear about this all the time in the government. And, it's if government isn't your thing, that's totally fine. But at least, hopefully you kind of pick something up a little bit when you go through this, all right? Okay. So the questions that you need to have answered during this are pretty simple, but it's more you're asking people this, right? So you have to go through and survey people and ask and see what they know. The first question that you have to ask is, how many civilian employees work for the federal government, right? And there's the note in there that it's okay for people to guess, so you can at least try and get some kind of number. It's the second question is, what type of programs does the federal government fund for its citizens? So this is asking, like, what does the government do to help citizens to kind of make sure that they're getting the assistance they might need? Where do you think the federal government gets its money to pay its 2 million employees and fund all the programs it provides for Americans, right? That's the really important question too. It also answers question 1. What is the Federal Reserve System and what does it do, right? All of these are questions that are, they might not seem that easy, especially if you're not really a history person, but or a government person, but finding out the answers is always really interesting. So I'll break it down into questions 1 and 2, and then we'll do questions 3 and 4. The first one is that there are literally over 2 million civilian workers that work for the federal government. This surprises people so many times because we often just say that the United States is run by the people who live in Washington, right? But what we forget is that the federal government has government agencies all over the place that are all the way down to secretaries, right? Janitor staff, all of these things, all these federal employees that help make these buildings and these agencies and these entities work. And they all play a role in making sure that these federal groups work and they are working for people, right? Now, it's easy to get bogged down in politics about this kind of thing, but it's just interesting to see that there's this many people that work for the federal government. 2 million people. That's a whole lot of people. You can probably hear my cat over there crying. Yeah, here he goes. Jeez. All right, number 2. What types of programs do the federal government fund for its citizens? This is a good one too, right? If you've heard of like government assistance or state assistance or any kind of extra assistance program that is basically using government-funded programs to help people in need, that's a government assistance program. All of these other things, right? Department of Education, Department of Defense, all of these things, right? The federal government funds those for the people to make sure that people are receiving school and education, right? To make sure that people are receiving things that they absolutely need to survive, right? The government and its funding is basically being used to meet the needs of the citizens that it represents, okay? So those are the questions that you gotta have, or those are the answers that you're kind of looking for. The third question that you have is, where do you think the federal government gets to pay its 2 million employees? That's taxpayer dollars. This all comes from people that that are hardworking every day, like you and me, right? If you get a paycheck, you're paying taxes, and all of this kind of gets dumped into a pot, and it gets split up and spread out, right? Think of it as like allowance almost, right? And the idea behind it is that it's there to be allocated appropriately and be moved around appropriately for people. This is a question that I think a lot of people really do know, but they don't realize it until they hear the answer, right? You know that your taxpayer dollars are supposed to go to the government. You know that your taxpayer dollars are going to be used, hopefully, appropriately to fund things that matter to you, roads, public buildings and things that you might use. Say you work in a downtown area, right, where there's city buildings and things. You want all this being maintained, sidewalks, all of these things that we use all of the time. If you have children that are in schools, it's the same thing, right? Making sure that these people have access to resources, making sure these people have access to public transportation, all of these things, the government and you as taxpayers kind of play a hand in. The last question that you have to cover is, what is the Federal Reserve System and what does it do? The simplest way that I can explain this is that the Federal Reserve is here to regulate, to supervise, to supply, and service money that is used in the United States, okay? They regulate it by making sure that people aren't making deals that are inappropriate. They check on businesses that might be growing too big. They make sure that basically any deal that occurs in the United States, the Federal Reserve hears about it, especially between big businesses. They supervise it to make sure that this is being handled legally, right? When you start working with millions of dollars or even billions, if you're in that business, the law matters, and it's a lot of legality to make sure that people aren't being ripped off and vice versa, right? Supplies money, right? If they feel that there is too low of a money amount out in the world right now, they will reprint. They'll print some money out to kind of keep it up there. But if you overprint money, right, and maybe you've heard of this, inflation occurs, or the value of the dollar decreases. And this is there basically to make sure that there isn't too much money in circulation, right? And what they have to make sure that they're doing is keeping an appropriate amount of money out there so that it doesn't overdo and overpopulate the market, right? And then what I mean when I say service money, they make sure that some bills are being taken out of circulation and things like that. If you remember when the 20s switched over, or when the 5s switched over in the United States, right? The Federal Reserve System played a big role in all of this to kind of make sure that it was all being done correctly, okay? Come on, there we go. All right, reflection piece. At the end of the assignment, after you do those, you ask the people and survey them to see how much they actually know. You'll be asked to do a reflection piece. Why ask these questions? Basically, it's important. I always think it's fun to ask these questions. I ask my students questions like this all the time just to see how much they do know and just to see how much people are informed. And it's not a way to catch people off guard or make them feel dumb or anything like that. It's more of just making sure that people realize that there is a sense of awareness you probably should have with the United States, or just in general with the world around you, right? If you're aware of what your neighbors are doing or what people next to you are doing, right? It's probably not too much of an ask to make sure that you know what's going on in your city and what's going on in your government. If you know what's going on in the world right directly around you, maybe you can broaden that scope a little bit and learn a little bit about what's happening in the world farther outside of that, right? I'm always surprised at who knows these things. Usually it's the people that you would least expect to know all of this. Like, they're like, oh, I've heard this. And then they answer the questions for you. And it's kind of it's a good conversation starter for people, because you can kind of ask them, why they do know that. And, maybe these people have backgrounds in the government. Maybe they're doing some things where they are, researching it or whatever, or maybe it's just a lucky guess. And even that's, a good conversation starter for people. I also think too, once you know the information, I think it brings on a little bit more of an importance to know it. And, you know, hopefully what you'll do is you'll take that information and you'll pass it on to somebody else. You'll give it to somebody that might use it. You'll pass it on to children, siblings, whoever. Question, you might be able to say, you know, hey, I know what you're saying. I know what this is. I want to go ahead and help you with this. It applies to you because, you know, the government's money is really yours, right? And we are expecting that they're using it, circulating it, moving it, selling, buying, whatever they're doing with it. We assume that they're doing it with your best interests in mind. At least we hope they do, right? Is this always the case? Yeah, hard to say. But that's always a big thing to note. So the reflection piece kind of brings it all together, right? You're not expecting everyone to know these questions. And if you are, even then, right, it's still important to kind of understand why you're asking people these questions. So here's how I grade it. I make sure that you've completed the survey, you've done it and asked the right amount of people that you're supposed to ask, which is good. And then I ask about if you answered all of the questions, right? All of the questions being all 4 of the questions I covered and the reflection pieces. I'm always interested to see how many people got it right. So make sure you put that when you do that part of the assignment. And then if you can, I mean, add in a little piece at the end where you maybe a note or something that explains, you know, hey, did that surprise you? Was that a shock to you, right? Seeing all of that. It always helps. And I think it's really important too to note. So it's good. Oops. We don't have any questions. If we do, you guys can all shoot me a message. So hopefully next time we get some more people to pop in. I don't know when I'm going to be doing my next one, but it's going to be sometime in the next few weeks, I think. And we're done. So hopefully you guys got something out of this. Hopefully you guys got something out of using the webinar kind of to teach yourself a little bit more about the government. I'm excited to kind of see what you guys do from here on out. So if you guys have any questions about this at all, shoot me a message. If you guys have any question about plagiarism or you are concerned about something I might have said, again, shoot me a message and we can go from there. So thanks guys for your time. I hope you guys have a good week.